Welcome to Pivot Parenting, the place where we recognize when your parental role needs to shift and how to do it. I'm your host and parenting expert, Heather Frazier. Welcome to today's episode. I have a rare treat for you because I understand that it is often awkward in addressing intimate topics with our teenagers. And we're hardwired this way for a very good reason. But we have to overcome part of that awkwardness to be able to help our children the very most in their sexuality. We need to be able to have conversations, model for them, answer questions, address situations. And I want you to be educated to be able to do this the most helpful for them and for you. Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife is a relationship and sexuality educator and coach. She has a PhD in counseling psychology from Boston College. She wrote her dissertation on LDS women and sexuality. She has taught college-level courses on human sexuality, and she currently has online courses that are phenomenal, along with several podcast options. She is fantastic, and I knew that she was the expert to address what I wanted to today, because in my best-selling book, How I Fixed My Teen, I talk about my first kiss. And that might not seem applicable to parenting your teen, but I tie it together very nicely, showing how our experiences model how we think and feel about ourselves and interact with the world. Needless to say, it was not the best experience. And I felt a lot of shame and guilt, and that affected me for decades until I was in my mid-30s and heard Jennifer Finlayson-Fife speak to my situation. And I finally recognized that what happened to me was not my fault, that I didn't do anything wrong, that I was not a bad person. And it so completely blew apart my self-concept in the most beautiful of ways. And of course, I had to have her on again so that we could discuss this more in depth for my benefit and mostly for you and your family's benefit. So without further ado, here's Jennifer. All right. Today we have the fabulous Jennifer Finlayson-Fife with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. We have such a fascinating topic that I know is of a personal nature to me and to so many other people out there, which is consent and modeling sexuality for our teens in a healthy, modern manner.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And in reaching out to Jennifer, I realized she's writing a book. I'm very excited to hear it. I invited her on to help me discuss my book, How I Fixed My Teen, because in it I mention Jennifer. I tell the story of my first kiss and how for decades that was a very shameful experience. Until I was listening to some of your content. I can't even remember the podcast episode or anything else other than the realization in an instant that I was not bad, that I was not sinful or wrong or any of the things I had assumed because of that experience. And it was instantly so freeing. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad.
Yeah, for your work. And yeah, your words of wisdom. It was crazy how that moment was. It was surreal.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just released from some sense of having done something dark and terrible.
Yes.
And instead, normal and developmentally normal or appropriate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that to be curious about sexuality, to want a boy to kiss me, which I wanted all of those things, but it went farther than I wanted.
Mm. Yeah.
And not to put too many spoilers on the book, I totally froze.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought that because I had wanted his attention so badly, that I wanted all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about how the concept of saying yes or wanting one thing is not wanting all things?
Yeah. Well, there's just so many layers. So to all of it. So it's a little bit like, where do you start? But one of the challenges that females often have, basically what you experience was some version of sexual coercion, right? That is some version of him going farther than you wanted,
Yeah,
and you don't have the psychological clarity to stop it.
right.
There's power predators, people who will just, take, they'll dominate, they'll take, they know that their partner doesn't want it.
They're
But then
physically aggressive. Yeah,
physically aggressive, exactly. And then there's like persuasion predators. That is that they kind of exploit the fact that they know the other person wants their approval. They know the person they're with, won't say no, feels self-doubting. And so they can take advantage of the power that they have in the relationship, the
sure.
control that they have psychologically. One of the things that I found in my dissertation research was that a lot of women had gone farther than they wanted because they felt they were in this double bind. Like they wanted the guy's approval that they were with. They wanted him to
Yeah,
like her. They wanted him to see her as the right kind of woman, but they didn't want what was happening sexually. But they felt like they had to be nice to him. So a lot of us are socialized into the idea that we're the gatekeepers, but we also have to be nice about it. You can't hurt a man's feelings. You shouldn't
definitely not.
feel
Yeah.
bad about you. And so a lot of the women that I was interviewing would be in this bind, like, how do I tell him I don't want this without hurting his feelings, without losing his approval? And because they're in that bind, they're much, much easier to take advantage of.
So, what is the answer to that question?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's really important as parents. I talk about this a lot in my the online course I do, How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex, which is this is a lot of the work of Gavin DeBecker, but you want to help your child know that if they want someone's approval and they want that person to like them, that it puts them in some disadvantage, and they have to be very careful about that, because the idea that I will do what this person wants to get them to like me puts them at a deep disadvantage that they can be taken advantage of if they're willing to go against themselves. And so you want to really teach your daughter or son, for that matter, if your son is vulnerable in this way, that you never want to do anything that goes against yourself for someone to like you. Because if you ever go against your core desires, your core values, your core integrity, right? You basically you can't be happy with somebody who will ask you to do that, and you can't sustain any meaningful relationship with somebody that you have to give up your sense of self for. But it also makes you vulnerable to exploitation. And so the Gavin DeBecker aspect of this, he talks about persuasion predators are always looking for privacy and control. So that's privacy where someone else, they can do something without anybody else witnessing. And they want psychological control. And so you want to help your teenager understand those two things, because they can either, if they're with somebody and they have gotten privacy and control, meaning they have psychological control over you because you want their approval, and they have privacy. If you have that feeling that something's, you're not being listened to, or you don't feel like you're being respected, or you don't feel, you want to alleviate one or both of those things. Either get where it's public, okay, because, or you give up the psychological control that they have over you by standing up for yourself, by saying no. No is a complete sentence. right? And people that say no, that stand up for themselves, are much less likely to be exploited sexually
Sure.
because most are persuasion predators. Very few are or whatever power predators,
Right.
right?
That's why we
So
have the
yeah,
grooming process.
that's right. That's right. And you're kind of luring somebody in to this idea that I'll love you if you do these things, or you'll have my approval if you do these things, or you're a part of this with me, you're partly responsible. That's going back to the other idea you said, well, because I said yes to one thing, does that sort of mean I say yes to everything? Can I say
Yeah.
yes to one thing and no to others? Yes, you absolutely can, always. I mean, I would teach my daughter that you are always in control of what you do. You always get to decide, and you can always say no. Not only can you, you ought to, if you have any question about whether or not you want to do something.
Yeah. And even change your mind midway in. It was a
Yeah,
yes at
absolutely.
first, and now it's a no.
Exactly. And, that's different than going around, breaking people's hearts and purposefully manipulating.
Sure.
That's one thing. But to say you always get to be the driver of your life. You get to decide what you do always. And that's got to be clear in any relationship that's going to be good for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Growing up in the 90s was just so hard.
Yeah.
Wanting
Yeah.
it, yeah, it just was interesting. I had such shame around it. I remember the next Monday going to school and just thinking that I had this emblazoned scarlet letter
Yeah.
on me, and everybody surely knew. And when they looked at me, they just knew. And I
Yeah.
didn't, a couple of my close friends knew, but I didn't ever share with my parents, which oddly enough, they were pretty sexually forward thinking,
Hmm.
but I didn't have that connection with them to confide in them.
Yeah.
But what should parents do if they come to know situations about what's happening with their child and in sexual intimate relationships?
Well, it's there's a whole range from like children getting, you know, exploited by a babysitter or even a peer that's a couple years older than them and so on.
Sure.
But one message you want to give your children is that um it's always okay to say no way to anybody. You always can say no to an adult if you're a child, to an older peer if you're a child, that you always it's okay to do that because kids often learn to defer to adults and defer to older teenagers or
Mhm.
whatever, and they feel afraid to stand up for themselves. You also want your kids to know that if you're in any situation that is working against you, I am here for you. Now, a lot of times an adolescent may feel like my mom would be really mad if she knew I even did this with this guy, and therefore I'm going to
Yeah.
hide all of it. And or similarly, if a child is drinking and your family doesn't drink, they may feel like, well, I'm just going to have to drive home because I can't tell them that I drank something. And you just want to be really clear with your kids. I will always come and pick you up. Okay, no matter what the situation is, I don't care if you've drunk and you feel ashamed of that and you don't want me to know. It's still better to call me. I don't care what situation you're in with a boyfriend, romantic partner. I'm always here to help you out and to help you sort out what's going on.
Yeah. And then when that happens, to honor your word.
Oh,
Right?
100%.
A
Right.
lot
Because
of
a lot of
times,
times parents can be like, well, you shouldn't have done blah, blah, blah.
what
And
were
that is,
you thinking?
yeah, never helpful. And that's just a
No.
parent managing their own anxiety and their own fears by going into critique. And that's going to be the surest way to shut your adolescent up and not come and talk to you.
Oh yeah.
You want to remember what it was like when you were a teenager, right? You didn't have your prefrontal fully engaged and you're making some decisions that weren't the wisest, and that's the way it goes, and your child needs you to care about them, to listen to them, and to really help them think through what they can do for themselves or how to protect themselves better.
Yeah, I love that. I've really tried to make sexual topics really normal around the house
Yeah. It's
in
good.
the sense of curiosity of what they're hearing. And I love I took your How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex course, and I loved what you were saying in there about like I'm very physically affectionate to
Mhm.
my family, and bedtime snuggles and back scratches are a big deal for me. And so I've
Mhm.
incorporated what you taught, which is, you know, do you like scratches or rubs better? And asking them what they think about the physical
What they like.
contact.
Yeah.
Would you like
Yes.
a hug or would you not like a hug tonight?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
really teaching them from the get-go that they can advocate for what they want and don't want and how
Yeah.
to discern.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a book that I recommend in the course called Your Body Belongs to You. And it's like for like 3 to 5 year olds, very simple kind of concept, but a very powerful one that your body belongs to you and you always get to decide. You don't even have to hug grandma if you don't want to, right? You always get to determine. And it's just a simple but powerful idea that I think kids really need to understand to protect themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That coupled with you can always talk to me
Yeah.
helps to safeguard them.
Yeah. And just that it's a scary world and feeling, I had a similar kind of incident happen to me when not similar to yours, but like when I was 6 years old, there was I was down in a different part of the neighborhood with one of my friends, and some boy that we didn't know who was a few years older came up and said he wouldn't let us go home unless we pulled down our pants. And, I just felt totally trapped. Like I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. I, I of course didn't want to pull down my pants, but it was just like I thought maybe I really couldn't go home.
Yeah.
And so I did it, and then I
Yeah.
ran home as fast as I could. Well, somehow my parents found out about it. I'm not sure exactly how, but they talked to me that night and there was no shaming, no like, why did you do that? You ought to be ashamed. Nothing like that. It was really just caring about what had happened, caring about me. And I don't even remember them saying I didn't have to do that I mean, they may have said something like that. My biggest sense was they're protective of me and they care about me and they're here for me. Like
Yeah.
it
They're
was a
going to stand up
relief
for
that
you.
yeah, it was a relief that they knew about it actually.
Yeah.
And so it's just like a reassuring that I wasn't in trouble because I didn't know how to handle a situation like that.
Yeah. And as our teens are developing into the adult realm, they're going to have so many experiences that they've never been in before.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And
Why do
now,
you,
yeah, go ahead, please.
sorry, why do you think parents, like their knee-jerk responses, why didn't you or why did you?
Well, I think one of the reasons is we forget as parents what it's like to be a teenager. You have to
Sure.
just take 3 minutes and remember, and you're like, oh yeah, that was like it was. There's a lot going on, and one of the things that's going on is you're trying to figure out, am I okay? Do I
Yeah.
fit in with my peers? Am I attractive? Do my peer? You turn from a parent focus to a peer focus, and you're interfacing with a lot of other insecure adolescents who are trying to establish that they matter. And so peers can do indecent things and you can be unclear about what's good judgment and what isn't good judgment. And so because it's a scary time, I think for parents because they see their child's emerging sexuality, they see their child's emerging autonomy, and any parent paying attention that makes us a little nervous. So it can be easy to see any misstep and confront it with our anger and our anxiety because we're just afraid. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to kind of slap it down like, no, you shouldn't have done that. That was not a good idea. Rather than stepping into their shoes a bit and thinking about, okay, what are they trying to navigate? What are they trying to figure out with this peer, with this boyfriend, with this um, friend?
Yeah.
And just caring they're going through enough and lending a helping hand if they need it.
Yeah. So
But yeah,
parents
settling our
listening,
own anxiety.
parents listening, know that there's going to be some missteps, some sideways oddities, and it's
Yeah.
all okay. They're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
figure it
Well,
out.
and That's right. They're definitely going to be missteps on your kids' part. And they need those missteps. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes kids that walk the line perfectly, they have their meltdown at age 45, you know. So that
Yeah.
is
That's
sometimes,
anxiety.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of times kids are working out some things about themselves through missteps. And you as a parent are also going to misstep. You're going to be like, you know, overly reactive, underreactive, whatever. But the good news is you can think about it and you can come back to it and say, hey, when you brought that up to me, I really respect you brought it up at all. And I'm sorry that I overreacted, or I'm sorry I met it with judgment. I think I just was afraid for you or sad for you. And so I handled it poorly. But I want you to know, you know, that I care, that what you're trying to figure out. So you as a parent can also come back and try again.
Yeah. Do the repair work.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's just as valuable because our kids see that we recognize our faults and
Yeah.
want to repair.
Yes.
Speaking of repair, in reflection back to that 16-year-old experience, I recognize so much self-abandonment
Yeah.
in the need to please, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I didn't, uh, honestly, I just was frozen in fear and like shock and delight and horror and all of the things.
Yeah.
And so I think my nervous system shut me down. But looking back, I see how much self-abandonment
Hmm.
was tied into that. How do
Yeah.
you see in your practice self-abandonment playing out with uh, your adult clients and the trickle down to their children?
Yeah. 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 So first of all, just in trauma, a lot of times we can freeze like that, and then we can be really hard on ourselves afterwards.
Yeah.
So why didn't I say something? Why didn't I, you know, say no? That doesn't mean that I somehow wanted it. I mean, I've had so many
Mhm.
clients who've gone through that self-torture of why didn't I stand up for myself? And there are good reasons why you didn't. That is, you either learned that it was partly your fault, or you learned that, you know, the feelings of other people mattered more than yours do, or you were just inexperienced enough that and shocked and you didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But a good dose of self-compassion is really important because, especially around sexuality, it can be very overwhelming to sort out what's happening, what we want, what to do about it. Um, so, but then at sort of the larger level, you know, if you learn that what other people want from you is more important than what you desire, and I work with clients all the time who have grown up in that meaning, and females can learn this a lot, you know, be selfless, give
Yep.
up, you know, your wants for the needs of others. That's the measure of feminine virtue. And, you know, attend to other people's feelings and serve them. Well, those are meanings that can teach us to not reference our own compass, to not reference our own desires, our own morality, our own goals for ourselves, because we can see that as being selfish, you know? And so
Yeah.
to suppress self is somehow the way to make the world better, to make a relationship better. And so girls often, and I know this is true for boys too sometimes, but they really learn how to self suppress to keep the peace. They don't learn how to say uncomfortable things or to even acknowledge uncomfortable truths within themselves. And so, in a moment like that where they want approval, so what happens is if you suppress your internal compass, you become even needier. You look more to others to tell you you're okay because you don't have a self reference point that's well developed. And so then you're looking even more to find a man who says you're enough or to find other people to tell you you're okay. And so you're vulnerable to pleasing and doing whatever will make people happy with you. And that, unfortunately, is a setup for being taken advantage of.
That
It's obviously
moms
in the
model for
sexual
their
realm, but
kids.
in any realm it can be.
Yeah.
And then yes, and then say a mother does that, a daughter can watch that and think that's how you're supposed to be in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I very much grew up with the one down, one relationship example.
Yeah.
And I tried so hard to step into that role in my marriage. And my husband is so amazing. He would never allow it.
Mm-hmm. He didn't
But I,
want you in the one down, you mean?
no,
Yes.
no, he
Right.
did not. This is
Yeah.
our money. This is our decision. This is our everything. And he would not
Yes.
allow me to be that submissive,
Yeah.
which I mean, he's amazing. But that's kind of what I was modeled was, keep everyone happy, don't ever
Yeah.
rock the boat. And I think a lot of women really have that nurturing heart. And so it's easy to buy into that.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's really easy to. And it's true. I think women, not only are we socialized, but we are also wired up to be very, it's a way of keeping babies alive, to
Yeah.
hear when the baby cries, to track what your children need, even when they're nonverbal. We're just really good at mapping that. And,
Mhm.
you know, that can make you more vulnerable because you track what other people desire. And it's harder to say no and make somebody else uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
so we can self betray because we don't want to hurt feelings,
Oh,
but then
yeah.
we have to deal with our own terrible feelings of self betrayal.
Yeah. Do you know how much
And
stuff I've bought to make the person happy that was selling?
yeah, yeah.
I
Oh,
I
it's
write about
true.
this in my book too. I was
Yeah,
shopping with my daughter and
yeah,
I was finally learning this skill of not being rude, but not being a people pleaser.
right.
And we were in a store together and I kindly, like, the girl was cute, 20 something, and I was like, "You know what? It's not a yes from us today, but thank you for
Yeah,
your
yeah.
time." And we walked out and my daughter was like, "You are such a Karen." And I was like, "Excuse me? Did I yell? No. Did I ask
Yeah.
to talk to the manager? No." And I just looked at her and I said, "You cannot quiet the voice I have finally found.
Yeah,
I
that's
will
good.
no longer please to keep others happy at my own expense. But
Yeah,
thank you." And I
yeah,
I invite you to do the same.
yeah, 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 yeah. Right. Exactly. That sometimes we have it like either you're submissive or you're mean. We like will
Yeah.
put people in those, or we put ourselves into those binaries, and that's just not true because you
No.
can be honest and kind and hold limits and care about other people and say no, thank you. Or like in a marriage, you can say no while still being invested in the marriage and the well-being of the sexual relationship, knowing that sometimes no is exactly how to keep that relationship good, being able to
Yeah.
say no.
I was just gonna
Yeah.
say that's the best way to invest is
Yeah.
owning what is true for you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
even though it's hard up front. We pay the
Right.
piper either way.
Yeah.
You pay it up front with like not being people pleasy, or you
Yeah.
pay it later by
That's right.
resenting and
That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. When we please people, if we work against ourselves in an effort to keep people happy with us, we end up resenting the people that we're trying to please because we feel controlled by them.
Yep.
And also it isn't love to do that.
No.
It's managing other people so that they feel good about you. And that's a different thing than love. And so, the more we can talk through those ideas and help our kids see it, the more they can navigate those interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah, I love that. I How does this play out with teaching our kids around dating and intimacy? I mean, most parents find this such an awkward conversation, but how do we teach how to advocate in dating, in intimacy?
Well, one thing I think is important is to help your kids. And again, I talk about this in the course. Like, you want to help your kids think preemptively before they're in romantic relationships about what do I really desire around my sexuality? What is important to me? What are my values around it? And of course, they're going to be borrowing from your values that they don't have another choice than that because they just haven't had enough life experience. But it is still beginning to step into a place of self defining, self authoring, like what matters to me around this. And then teaching your kids that it's really, really important to be true to what you value, right? So I was teaching in church once the young women about this thing, and I was saying, you've learned your values from church, from your parents around how you ought to be around sexuality, but I want you to take a moment and write what you desire for yourself around this. And then, so they wrote for a while, and I invited anyone who wanted to share. But, a lot of young women were saying, I want a sexually exclusive relationship. I want a committed relationship. I don't, want anything short of that. And I said to them, it's just really, really important that you stay true to what you desire. Because if you betray yourself to get someone to love you, to get someone to not be upset with you, you make yourself weaker. Being true to your values is really essential for being a strong woman. And anyone that you're in relationship with should respect that if it's really coming from the best in you, if it's really coming from your honest self. So you want your kids to have a sense of what it is they desire and want to create through sexuality and in their interpersonal relationships, and then encouraging them that being true to it is the pathway to their growing strength as a person. And betraying it might get you momentary approval, but ultimately too much self-disapproval.
Okay, so as you were talking, I just heard a lot of parents, friends, family, clients in my head screaming in terror of of that sounds really scary to let my kid explore what they want independent of what they've been taught. Can you speak to
Yeah.
that?
So couple things. One is that, let's say your child were to say, well, I want to start dating when I'm 13 and I want no, right. Let's say that they just want something really reckless. Okay. I'm not saying that you go along with whatever your teenager says they want, because you still ultimately are their parent and you're setting up a reality that is safe for them.
Yeah. Or even the teen acknowledging that they can have an opinion of their own outside of what they've been taught. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
But if
no.
parents don't do that, first of all, they are going to have an opinion that's different than yours
Yeah.
anyway. So you might as well let them be deliberate about it rather than just rebellious. Because if you're saying you can't have opinions other than mine, you're going to have either super compliant children who don't know their own minds, but ultimately struggle, or they're going to be rebellious. And all they're going to do is rebel against your opinion, which is also not self-defining. For your kids to actually be strong and in control of their lives, they have to start this process of sorting out their own minds.
Yeah.
And so if you're basically too afraid to let them claim their agency and own their own minds, that's a failure of parenting, in my opinion.
So what is a parent who felt that like tightening in their chest? Where should they begin to allow space for that?
Well, one thing I would say is, first of all, your child's going to do it anyway. I mean, whether or not you acknowledge it, they're already trying to think their own thoughts and doing their own thing. And the more controlling you are, the more that likely they are to be making reckless choices. The second thing I'd say is the best chance. So in my dissertation research, the women who actually internalized and lived out their parents' standards were the ones that deliberately chose it as adolescents. They said, this matters to me. I also value this. I want to do this. And they also had the most successful transition into marriage and really enjoyed sexuality. So because they made it their own, rather than I'm not having sex to keep my parents happy, I'm having sex to keep my boyfriend happy. When it was external, they were really distressed. When they could move that locus of control internally, they were able to integrate their sexuality and make much better decisions. So the more kids are making decisions out of fear, the worse those decisions will be. The more they're making them out of a deliberate place of kind of connecting their choices to their values, the better those decisions are going to be. So if you want the best chance of your child internalizing your values, give them the space to consider those values. Mm-hmm.
Mic drop right there. I love that. um, when we're considering sexuality for our kids, and God wired us so that within families, sexuality feels really icky, so that incest is minimal.
Mm-hmm.
But considering the lenses in which we have available to us and which we use to view sexuality as parents, what are some of the more helpful ones?
Mm-hmm. So give that to me one more time. So what are some of the healthier lenses as parents
Yes,
have
even
towards?
though it might feel awkward and uncomfortable, um, until we warm up to it, right? We talk about it so much that it's, random questions pop up and whatever. But a lot of families aren't or may never be that comfortable. What are some helpful lenses in which we can still have the awkward if it's there and address things with our kids?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say one is that sexuality just is a given. It's just part of the human condition, the human experience. Your kids are sexual from birth, just as you were. And so learning to navigate the body and sensuality and sexuality is just a task of your child growing up. And so because of that, you are a mentor by default because you had this child who needs to sort of track how to make meaning of the body, of their sexuality. And so they're going to be referencing you and the larger culture to understand it. And so I think to do your job as a parent, you really owe it to your child to offer both an acceptance of their body and of their sexual nature, right? Just like to cherish them and to cherish their bodies, right? And to celebrate them as individuals. This is like one of the kindest things you can do for a child because they can feel my mom's in love with me in the best sense. And
Yeah.
so they feel valued and valuable and to even enjoy them sensually, like in an appropriate way, of course, but just,
Sure.
kissing them and
Snuggles.
enjoying them and snuggles and all that.
Yeah.
It's just a way of teaching them that the body is good, that they are good. And then as they progress along towards adolescence and more peer focused sensuality, right? Just helping understand they have this to navigate their sense of self, whether or not they're valued by their peers, how they're going to relate to their bodies and the bodies of others. And so they're going to do that imperfectly, but they're in a learning process that's really, really important to being capable of adult sexual intimacy. So, how do I give them the guidelines and the structure that they need to sort out who they are, but not give them so much freedom that they hurt themselves in the process, right? So there's just this balance of how instilling values, offering structure, and allowing them to kind of sort out who they are around this through adolescence to prepare them more for adulthood. So I don't know if that's a lens, but that's just like a perspective
Yeah.
of how to think about what your job is. The course I teach on it is really helping parents to think about how do I help my child integrate their sexuality at age 4 versus age 8 versus 12. So I'm really giving parents a way of thinking about what the child needs and what their role is relative to that, with the goal being sexual integration, like being able to really be at peace with your embodied sexual self, through the way your parent taught you to be in relationship to yourself and others.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, Before we wrap up, do you have any other gems of wisdom or where listeners can find you?
Well, I would just say, as a parent, be kind to yourself. We're navigating so many meanings, right? And,
Yeah.
just in a culture that's much more sexually liberal than the culture that you may have grown up in or that your parents grew up in. So, there's just a lot of change, and trying to sort out what's right and good is a process. And to just know on what, just as on a simple level, that caring about doing right by your child is more than half the battle, because they can tell that you care about doing it right, even if you're not doing it right. Okay. Even if you're missing some things, but you really do care about their well-being, that matters a lot. And then where to find me? You can find me at my website, which is my last name, Finlayson-Fife.com. So 2 names, Finlayson-Fife. And so on there are my online courses and a podcast that I do where I work with couples around issues around sexuality and emotional intimacy and so on. So it's all there.
Yeah. And I'll put that link in the show notes if you're driving or your hands are full.
Yeah.
Thank you again for being on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope that you got so much out of that conversation. It was so fun to have with her. She is always so insightful and gifted to articulate the most powerful things. If you would like to find her website and information are in the show notes, as is the ability to find my book, How I Fixed My Teen. The most common feedback I'm hearing from my book is that I couldn't put it down and that they had never felt so seen, so understood. It's like you were in the room with me. You were inside my head. How do you know these things about me? I've never told anyone. And that in and of itself can be freeing, but I am also hearing how helpful it is to shift really sore spots so that they can best parent their kids and love everyone in their life. Again, all the links and everything are in the show notes. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and we will see you next week.